All right, so everybody, welcome to POSE, the Program for Open Scholarship and Education. Very happy to see you here and happy to see that you're interested in this area of work. So we will just get started with our land acknowledgement. So UBC Vancouver, which is hosting this session, is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Sorry, I see that the the slide is a little off, but I do also want to mention because we do have a facilitator that is from the Okanagan campus, and that the Okanagan campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Sioux Okanagan people. And if you would like to share where you are and the Indigenous territories from which you are working or where you live, do feel free to do that. You'll see the native-land.ca website listed there. But before also we get started and start talking about what open scholarship is and get through our agenda, I just wanted to mention that we know that POSE is about open scholarship, and it's worth noting that a lot of the theoretical foundations for openness is grounded in Western notions of copyright law and ownership, and that these can be in tension with Indigenous and traditional ways of knowing. So while openness is a value that we all support, clearly, it is one value among many and needs to be considered alongside our commitment to decolonization and truth and reconciliation. All right, so just to begin, I'm just going to walk us through our agenda. So today we're going to do a overview of open scholarship. So what do we mean when we're talking about open scholarship and how that connects into some of the values around what open scholarship kind of contains. We're going to do a little bit of work of getting to know each other, as well as introducing you to the POSE program with a little bit of walkthrough and discussion about what you'll be doing with inside of the open access, open research, and open education modules. We're going to also talk a little bit about how we've incorporated content around Gen AI into open scholarship, as that's really changing the way that we do things in this space. We're going to have a bit of a breakout session, and then finally sharing back anything that you discussed during that session, as well as answering some questions if you do have any. So first, we're going to start off with just sort of an understanding of what we mean by open scholarship. And before we begin digging into what openness means, we want to talk about open scholarship. We're talking about the application of open practices throughout teaching, learning, research, and scholarly environment. But what does that mean in the context of kind of open scholarship writ large? Openness can mean a variety of things and often is confused as a definition as a context in which we work can affect the meaning and understanding of open. So we often like to begin talking about open scholarship by thinking of a museum, like a metaphor. So within the context of a museum or a library, openness means that the materials, so the paintings, the sculptures, the artwork, the books, if you're in a library, are available to use, usually at no cost or low cost if it's a museum. So for people to see and experience, to experience and think about that material itself, but the act of taking the artwork, changing it, owning it for your own purposes, or keeping it with is not in keeping with the notion of what open means within inside of, say, a museum space. So when we're talking about open scholarship, we're moving away from the traditional notion of open, so the idea of being able to see, to access, to experience it, to a grander notion that allows people to build upon content, adapt it for their own purposes, and license it in a way that supports the health of the open commons so that others may do the same. So this is where we are beginning our shared understanding of open scholarship and what POSE identifies as openness. But of course, there's more complexities to the definition, and there's greater ways by which open can be defined. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to pass this on to Leela, and she is going to speak about what does open mean within the context of open scholarship.
Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of walk through this graphic that unpacks the different dimensions of openness that will come into play for research, teaching, publishing. So right at the top is cost. For many people, this is the first thing that comes to mind. So open meaning free. So no paywalls. You don't have to pay for a textbook, journal subscriptions. This is something that draws people to open scholarship in the beginning. But it's also worth remembering that free to use doesn't mean free to make. So open resources still involve time, effort, funding, whether that's a faculty member's time writing an open textbook or even something like an open platform that needs time to maintain. Another factor to consider is just the basic cost of an internet connection. So that's kind of a ground level cost for access to any online resource. The next thing is licensing. So another approach to open is having an open license. So we'll be talking about Creative Commons early in the course. These are standard copyright licenses that anyone can apply to their work. And this allows you to share, remix, reuse different levels of permission without having to contact the copyright owner directly and request that permission. So openness here is about how clearly and generously those permissions are granted. And then there's technical openness. So when we think about technical openness, this is something we'll get into more in the open research portion. So a resource might be labeled open, but if it's locked in a proprietary file format or it requires specialized software or skills to access or to modify, it's not actually that usable in practice. So there's different levels of openness there. And then transparency is another form of openness. So in research, this could mean sharing your data, sharing your code, or your methodology so that others can replicate your findings and build on your work effectively. In teaching, this might mean explaining to students how their data is being collected through course surveys, learning analytics, or platforms, so they're aware and informed of their own data and how that's being collected. So openness in this context is about making the process visible, not just the final product. Openness also raises the question of who gets to participate. So this means thinking about whose voices are included, whose scholarship gets cited, whose stories are told, and whose ways of knowing are recognized. So it includes designing with accessibility and equity in mind. So using universal design for learning principles or choosing a tool that supports multilingual learners and is accessible for assistive technologies. So openness is also about inviting more people in, not just making content broadly available. And then a final dimension we have on here is like the social dimension. So open scholarship and open education aren't just about sharing, they're often about collaborating. So some examples of this are co-authoring with students or co-creating with community partners, or opening up your peer review to a broader audience to look at. So here openness is relational. So it's more about breaking down barriers between, say, experts and learners, between institutions and communities. So overall, when we think about whether or not a resource is open, it's useful to ask open in what way and open for whom. I'll just pass back to Erin.
Thanks, Leila. So now that we kind of have a sense of open in terms of kind of definitions of all the ways by which we talk about open when we're talking about open scholarship, it's really important for us to get a sense of kind of the values that are also associated to open. There's very much the goals and objectives of creation that is there that speak to many of those pieces of openness, but there is a set of values that are attached. So open scholarship is a broad and somewhat loose term that has emerged in response to a need to identify and speak to a growing number of open practices within academia. And open access, open science, open data, open education make up a sprawling landscape of interconnected approaches and focuses on openness. Now, openness, if we're starting to talk about value propositions, really has roots in democracy, equality, and social justice, as all areas of open scholarship really operate under assumptions that knowledge creation and dissemination should be understood as a social practice. And we do have from the Virginia Commonwealth University, the director of online learning innovation, Tom Woodward, who states that openness openness is a purposeful path towards connection and community, and the value of inclusion, social impact, and participation are integral to the practice of open. So as mentioned earlier by Leela, it's at its core, open does focus on a variety of open practice. So we're talking about cost, licensing, to address the community information needs and interests in participation. But there also are high overarching value propositions that are connected to open scholarship. So there are commonly held values that seem to cross over all open scholarship areas, although some are more prevalent in some areas. So like, for example, transparency and reproducibility in research, it is a value, but it is more greatly prominent inside of, say, open science and open research areas. However, the core values of participation, community building, free and unrestricted access to research outputs are fundamental to all aspects and facets of open scholarship. So if we look at the literature around open scholarship, you're really going to find these core values. So community collaboration with knowledge creation, social justice commitment to reduce barriers to information access, openly sharing of results for reproducibility and credibility, transparency, open sharing of, let's say, grant proposals, research protocols, and data. So all aspects of that process. Speed and efficiency in sharing research findings, that became especially important when we're talking about the COVID years, which I guess we're still in, but the early years of finding so it's sort of the vaccines for COVID. So supporting open and free participation, engaging in technologies and networks to create collaborative communities, as well as advancing community knowledge by working together for a common good. And then finally, engaging the users of knowledge in the knowledge process or the knowledge creation process and production. Now, in addition to those core values in the literature, there is also a final value that is becoming much more apparent in the practices of open scholarship as goals and objectives have moved beyond the notion of everything should just be openly available, which seemed like a very beginning way of thinking about open scholarship. And we're becoming now more nuanced in understanding what open means within the world of knowledge. So not just Western notions of knowledge and knowledge sharing. And this is a critical view that identifies and addresses histories of unethical information mobilization practices, including research extraction and sharing that doesn't serve the community from which the knowledge is created, held, and protected. And a very good example of this is with Indigenous knowledge. So Indigenous knowledge is fundamentally tied to Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and living. So knowledge in Indigenous community context is often tied to the personal histories of the families themselves or the tribal community themselves. So, as Christine McCracken and Skylee Stormhogan, who wrote about open education Indigenous knowledge, they mentioned that creators seeking to include Indigenous knowledge need to approach their work with a framework of reciprocity, care, and humility. And they need to understand that many systems of organization and knowledge production are directly linked to colonialism and can cause harm to Indigenous peoples. So creators need to be more conscious of their effort to avoid inflicting harm on Indigenous peoples and communities through non-consensual sharing or appropriation of knowledge. So this is a critical approach to open scholarship that centers ways of engaging with knowledge sharing that ensures openness doesn't replicate harmful past practices in education, research, and dissemination. So openness for openness sake is not a value held within open scholarship, even though that might have been a very beginning driver was all things should be open. We're getting much more nuanced in our understanding of openness at this point. So now that we have kind of that introduction to open scholarship, I'm going to pass it to Wild, and we're going to meet each other and have a bit of a hello from your facilitation team.
Thanks, Aaron. And I just really would like to highlight that POSE is really a collaborative effort, and it's really been developed by several different teams and units here at UBC. So POSE is presented sort of broadly by the Open UBC Working Group, and if you're a member of UBC, we'll provide more information about how you can join that group yourselves. But it's really pulled together by the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology and the UBC Library, and that includes the UBC Okanagan Library, the Research Commons, and the Center for Scholarly Communication. And we do have a pretty large facilitation team, and we're just going to take a minute to introduce ourselves. I think we'll just go in order as the pictures appear on this screen. So we'll go left to right. And so, Craig, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Craig Thompson. I'm a programmer analyst working in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I'm one of the facilitators for the Open Research Unit, and I'm a computer scientist by trade, so I have a particular interest in open software. I'll pass over to Aaron.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Erin Fields. I am the Open Education and, sorry, that needs to be updated, but I am the Open Education and Scholarly Communications Librarian for UBC Library Vancouver campus. My focus for facilitation is on the open access section that I'll be doing with Stephanie Savage, but I do have a lot of knowledge in the open education section as well. So I'll pass it to Leela.
Hi, I'm Leela. I'm the Scholarly Communications Assistant at UBC Library, so I support open education and open scholarship projects. I'm just kind of providing background information everywhere, but specifically in probably open access. So nice to meet everybody.
Hi everyone, my name is Rian Number. I'm one of the facilitators for POST. My role is education resource developer with focus on open resources, and I'm coming from Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at UBC. At work, I provide support for open education related technology, including UBC Wiki and WordPress. And for POST, I mainly work on developing the Creative Commons module.
Hey everyone, I'm Lucas Wright. I'm a senior ed consultant at the CTLT, and I've had the opportunity to work on some of the the generative AI sections around open, particularly around open resources. Great to meet you, and turn it over to Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Savage. I'm also in the library. Scholarly communications and copyright are my portfolio areas. And I worked primarily with Aaron to develop the open access unit and the modules. And probably my specialty area would be the copyright piece. And I will be seeing many of you again as you work through the open access unit and hopefully come to some of the sessions in support of that unit. Nice to meet you all.
Hi everyone, I'm Trish. I'm an evaluation and research consultant with the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology at UBC Vancouver. Most of my role involves supporting faculty, staff, and students doing evaluation work around teaching and learning projects, mostly focused around larger university initiatives. As part of POSE, I worked alongside Craig to refine and develop the open research module. So also looking forward to hearing your input when you get to that section.
Hi, everyone. My name is Donna Langell. My pronouns are she and they. I'm the open education librarian on the Okanagan campus. So if you're joining from the Okanagan, I would be your contact in the library for open education. I'm also new to the POSE team and just helping where I can.
Great. And hi, everybody. I'm Will Ingle. I'm a strategist for open education and initiatives with the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at UBC Vancouver. And I just want to say I'm just deeply honored, and it's great to be joined by so many fantastic colleagues. We'd also like at this point to maybe get to know you a little bit better. We're going to ask you to do a couple different activities. And the first activity we're going to do is just to let us kind of know where you're coming from. So I'm going to drop a link to a Padlet in the chat. And on this Padlet, we're just going to ask you to provide a little bit general information about where you're located. And you don't need to provide anything specific. You can just do sort of generally like Vancouver, BC, or if you're coming from a different area. To do that, you can just click this pink plus button at the bottom, and you can either search or drop a pin for the map. So I'm just going to type in UBC, as that's where I'm located, and I will go ahead and drop it. And it'll drop it on the map. And we'll just take 1 minute. And if you want to let us know generally where in the world you are, this is an open course and people are coming from many different places. So, nice. I see someone from Victoria, more Vancouver. Fantastic. Nice. Great to see somebody joining us from Calgary. Great. Great. It looks like we have a nice Western Canada cohort this year. And again, I really want to thank you for joining us. We'll come back and ask you to do one more activity just to provide us a little bit more information about your interest and who you are. But before we do that, I'd like to give a tour of the POSE course and sort of its structure and setup. So POSE, we try to design following the principles of open, and we've tried to make it as open as possible. So POSE, the entire course is hosted on a WordPress website. So this is the POSE homepage. It can be found at pose.open.ubc.ca, and most of the POSE content is contained within this website. So this is the homepage, which provides sort of just a general overview of the course. You can find various different pieces of information here, such as descriptions of learning activities that we'll be doing as part of the course, as well as key dates and sessions for the synchronous sessions. So each month we'll have a different unit covering a different topic, and each unit has 2 synchronous sessions. I'll talk a little bit more details about them at the end. Additionally, you can find information about communication, and as well, again, if you're can't remember who we are, your facilitators are listed here as well. So across the top of this website are the ways to get into the different modules. So we have really 3 core units plus a getting started unit. So the getting started unit will provide a lot of the information that we've covered today, as well as some additional information and a code of conduct, and we do ask that you read through that. So each month we'll be opening a new unit, officially opening, although the content is always there. So this month of May, we'll be looking at open access. In June, we'll be looking at open research, and in July, we'll be looking at open education. Additionally, on the top, you'll see something called the activity bank. And the activity bank has activities that we're going to be asking you to do as part of each individual POSE unit. The concept behind the activity bank is to really learn by doing. So we've tried to make these activities practical and interesting. The next tab over is resources, and this is where we sort of put our permanent archive of various resources that we create through POSE. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll post recordings of synchronous sessions in this tab, as well as on the updates tab. And one of the things we've also tried to do is, as part of our strategy for making this course open, is if you're from a different institution and would like to run POSE at your institution, we do publish the entire website's XML files, so you could download this XML file, and if you have a WordPress site, you could just import it and get POSE up and running on your own site. We tend to do updates constantly, so the 2025 XML file will be published at the conclusion of the course. We're also looking at turning the course into sort of an open textbook after it concludes as well. Finally, on the tabs, what you'll see on the far tab is our communications channel, our updates channel. So we will be doing a number of announcements in this channel, and we'll also be using just email to help with communications. And we promise not to send more than 2 emails per month. But do check this updates tab. We may be sticking more communications, more links to recordings and things like that in the updates. So if you're on the POSE site, do please take a look at that. So let's just look at what a unit looks like. So again, May will be open access month, and in this unit, and as well as all units, are composed of 3 different modules or 3 different topics. So within open access, we have a number, and I'm just going to drill in and show what one looks like. So this is the author rights unit. You can proceed sort of linearly through it by using the buttons at the bottom. And that will take you through the pages, and you can go forward and back through the unit. Or because these are rather large units and modules, you can just click through the side menu and get directly to the section that you want to go into. Going back to an individual page, you'll see a lot of the POSE content is text, but we do embed multimedia and videos. We do have H5P embedded elements. So if you're not familiar with H5P, it is a interactive content that we use for sort of self-testing and multiple choice questions that you can use to help yourself understand if you've understood the content on the page. So reinforcing formative learning. Then we do have sections that are called Dig Deeper, and these are lists of readings and links that we think that would be of interest to you. Please note that these additional readings in the Dig Deeper sections are optional. So as learners, you should feel comfortable following your interests in your own capacity. There is no expectation that you'll read all the additional content, and we do put a lot of additional content through those links. But we do hope that you walk away from Pose with access to a robust set of resources that you can engage with and reference in the future. Then at the end of each unit, you'll see that we have a number of different activities that we're going to ask you to complete. So first, again, is that open activity bank, and we ask you to do 2 activities per unit. So you can go directly to the activity bank and sort them by the unit, and it'll sort, or you can just directly within the unit, click the button, and it'll take you there to a different view of just the ones applicable to open access. Just as an example, this is a activity where you're asked to take a paper or a publication that you've done, look at the reference list, and try to calculate how much would it cost you to access those references if you didn't have access to them through a library or through a subscription, if you're paying out of pocket for them. We then ask you to put your answer in the comments. In the activity bank, we do leave up comments from previous iterations of Pose, so you can see what other people have found doing these activities. And all information is, or all sorts of completions for the activities are generally done through the comments here. And you can just go ahead and, sorry, this is a long one. A lot of people have done this one, and just leave a comment at the bottom. We also don't require you to use your real name on this, so these are all open. So if you don't wish to share this under your real name, please do feel free to use a synonym, use a alias if you'd prefer. So we do ask, just going back, 2 activities per unit. We also have a shared reflection per unit, and this shared reflection is a opportunity or a guided activity to think about how you would apply some of the stuff we've covered in the unit to your own practice. So we kind of scaffold through that, and we ask you to put the shared reflection in a Padlet, same technology we used for the map, and to share what you're thinking about and how you would apply this. We do encourage you to read other people's shared reflections, and you can respond to them as well. This might give you inspiration for ways you can make your own practice open. And then finally, at the very end of the unit, we do ask that you do just sort of a unit completion checklist, and this will just help us track for certificate generation. So it's just a survey. You can go in and just check the ones that you've done, and this will help us know how many people are progressing through the course, as well as who has actually done the activities at the end. So just going back to the course, I just want to give one quick update, or one quick nod again to the idea that we do have synchronous sessions. So if you look at the key dates and sessions, 2 synchronous sessions per month. One synchronous session is what we call an open workshop, and these are workshops that are intended to be sort of engaging and practical with either people working in the field or looking at one of the practicalities of open scholarship. And then we have an open discussion session, and these are synchronous sessions where as a cohort we can come together and read an article or discuss a topic and a theme, and they're facilitated sessions. So this month we'll be having Jeanette Hatherfill and Chloe Marshall from Coalition Publica talking about advancing Canada's open access publishing infrastructure. And then Steph and Aaron will be hosting a discussion around has the open access movement actually failed? So really interesting topics. We do say in sort of our overview of the course that the open workshops are mandatory. The open discussions are not mandatory. We know people's lives are busy, and we've tried to make this course as flexible as possible, so we will be recording those sessions. However, there's a lot of value in coming to the workshops so you can and the synchronous sessions so you can engage with your fellow cohort. And we have some really interesting and great speakers lined up for that. We are using the same Zoom link for every session. But we do ask that you register for them individually, and that registration just really helps us anticipate and understand and plan for these workshops. So if you could do that, if you could register for them, if you could add them to your calendars, that would be fantastic. So that is a very high-level overview of the POSE course and structure. And I want to come back and give a quick question again to who you are and a little bit about your interests. So I'm going to drop a link to another Padlet. And this is just for a minute. And if you decide you want to answer this at a later time, that's okay too. But we'd like to know what inspired you to participate in this program and what kinds of open scholarship practices or projects are you interested in? So if you're really engaged in open software, we'd love to know that. If you're more interested in open education, or we'd love to know that too. If you have links of open projects you'd like to share, go ahead and drop them in there. So again, to do that, again, press the plus button, and you can just start typing a response right into it and add to it. We're just going to take 2 minutes to do that. But we will leave these Padlets up and available. And again, please do feel free to add to them at any time. So I'll stop talking for 2 minutes and let people introduce themselves. Fantastic. I'm seeing people saying they're interested in open scholarship in the general sense. They work in academic publishing, lots of open education and open educational research. Myself, I put in I'm more interested in open research, as that's an area I'm a little weak in. Yeah, supporting faculty to make their work open. Fantastic. Great, and I see while this is being filled out, there was a question in the chat. Can you please confirm which workshops are mandatory to attend and complete the course? So generally, the sessions we've said are mandatory are the ones labeled workshops, and the discussions and the ones that are not mandatory are the chats. But we really encourage you to come as much as possible. There's a lot of value, again, in communicating that. We will be recording the workshops. The chats, which are more discussion-based, we won't be recording. Great. Looking to develop a textbook, an open textbook. Working on open educational resources, and nice. To learn more about the field broadly and to fill in the gaps. Perfect. Thank you. I think with that, it's fantastic to meet you. It's fantastic to see what your interests are. With that, I think we'll go in and take a little bit more of a deeper dive into what we'll be covering in each session.
I think this is me, so I will proceed. Is that?
Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, thank you, Steph.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about open access, which is the first unit in POSE. So at the highest level, this unit is meant to introduce participants to some of the broader ideas and complexities at work within open scholarship, along with the basic mechanics of how open access operates within the larger publishing ecosystem. So over the course of this unit, participants will have an opportunity to examine the current economics of publishing and the impact that the commercialization of publishing has had on academia, libraries, and systems of global research dissemination. You'll better understand author rights and intellectual property, particularly in relation to publisher agreements and negotiations. And finally, the unit will provide an overview of the development of open access and the prevalent models of open access, including the challenges and opportunities they afford. I'm hoping I can control the slides here. Let's see if this will work. I'm clicking on control slides and advancing, but I don't know if that's
I
if it's
can
happening.
I'll do it for you. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Okay, so here you can see the 3 modules that make up the open access unit, as well as the topics for each page within the modules. So I'm not going to go over the individual modules in too much detail, as the content should hopefully speak for itself once you get into the unit, but I'll briefly touch on the thinking behind the 3 modules that make up this unit. So when we were designing the content that would go into the open access unit, we wanted to strike a balance between providing practical information, the how-to of open access, and introducing participants to the challenges and complexities inherent in a deeper understanding of open access. So each module in the unit contains both this more practical knowledge alongside some deeper engagement. And as a further note, the pages that are in red here have either been modified or added for this latest iteration of POSE in order to address some of the impacts of generative AI on open access and in scholarly publishing more broadly. So this is new content. And if you have feedback on it, please, after we're done POSE, please let us know what you think of this new content. I don't know if there's just a delay, maybe. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so just making sure I have my notes on my other screen here. So as you move through the content in the OA unit, you will notice that no, I think I've gone too far. Hold on. There we go. You'll notice that there are many opportunities to dig deeper into the topics presented. So while other units of POSE also present these opportunities, there are many more, I would say, in the OA unit. And this is a reflection of the fact that the OA unit is perhaps more ideas focused than the other 2 units, which are more grounded in practice. So as POSE on the whole was conceived of only as an introduction to open scholarship and not a comprehensive overview, the Dig Deeper readings provide participants with an opportunity to engage in the ideas being presented in a more meaningful way. So Will has already said this, but I'm going to say this again because we seem to get this feedback every time we do POSE, that none of this content is required reading. But I strongly encourage you to do at least some of the additional readings, especially if you're already familiar with the basics of open access. So this Dig Deeper content is where you will be able to go beyond the introductory content into the more nuanced aspects of open access. Okay, so I also want to spend a moment on what we're referring to as the big ideas presented in the OA unit. So these 3 big ideas are each taken from one of the 3 OA modules and represent the larger questions we hope to address throughout the module content. So the big ideas are structured as open-ended questions and leave room for each of you to come to your own conclusions, which we encourage you to explore through your engagement with the module content, but also through the activities, discussions, and reflections that accompany the modules. Lastly, and again, this is a bit of reiterating what we've already talked about, but I want to make a plug for these virtual sessions that are offered in collaboration with the unit. So firstly, on May 8th, we'll be joined by 2 colleagues from Coalition Publica, which is a collaborative initiative to foster diamond open access publishing in Canada. It's a wonderful opportunity to hear more about this homegrown effort to support academic publishing in Canada. And then also on May 14th, Erin and I will be hosting an informal conversation in which we'll discuss as a group a thought-provoking blog post on the potential failures of the OA movement. The comments on this post are, I would say, as interesting, if not more so, than the blog post itself, and they provide a really fulsome perspective on the OA movement from various perspectives. So I definitely encourage people to take a look, even if you can't join us for the discussion. I think this is a really interesting resource to take a look at. And with that, I will hand it back to my colleagues to go over open research.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steph. Again, just giving a big picture overview of the open research module. So there's 3 sections, open workflow, open software, and open data. And I'll talk about each of these in turn. As a whole, the open research section, we kind of focus on 3 main questions, or ask you to reflect on these questions, and there are pieces that we address through the content. So thinking about how increasing the transparency of a research project and the processes involved improve that process and help advance knowledge. How can open collaborative methods increase efficiency and widen engagement with your research? And what are the attributes of open data? So what does that mean to say that your data is open, and what are some processes for making your data open? So looking first at the open workflows section. So a workflow are basically the steps that are taken to complete a task. In the idea of research, you think about, ideation, developing the tools or figuring out what tools you need to use, going through the process of collecting data or acquiring data through whatever means, reviewing, analyzing that data, doing some kind of writing or dissemination of that work and sharing out to the community. So for all of those kind of basic elements of a research project, that's your workflow, is what's happening at each stage of those pieces. And so an open workflow is just when each step of that process is openly shared, making the entire process transparent. It's about making the process transparent for others in the sense of opening it, but you'll see we make a really strong push for the importance of workflow also for yourself to help you remember the steps that you took along the way. So as part of this section, the module will provide guidance on how to create clear documentation for your workflow. So things like file naming conventions, developing or creating project metadata, what metadata is, open file formats, and so on. And we'll talk about how an open workflow really benefits reproducibility and replicability as well. So the next section is open software. And so this is where we get into different considerations and pitfalls when using open software and code, how it can support your work by reducing barriers that proprietary software has in terms of ability to reuse and reproduction of results, and that important element of open research. We'll also cover some core concepts relating to creating open code that's meaningful, so again, both to yourself and to be able to share it out so that it's usable for others, and how this benefits scholarship regardless of what discipline you are in. I know the open research module, sometimes we see people not as engaged because they kind of get a little bit scared, I think, thinking like, oh, I'm not a software person, or, I mostly work with qualitative data. We do touch on a lot of, or we've tried to incorporate more around the multidisciplinary aspect. So not just focusing on, deep dives into code or quantitative data, but how it can apply cross discipline. So please don't be discouraged, even though you might see, some acronyms or symbols you're not familiar with yet. And the last section unit that we cover in open research is open data. And so data is a fundamental part of research, again, regardless of what discipline you're in. Within this module, we'll cover concepts related to privacy and policy related to open data and guidance for how to make your data open. We also have some really fun examples on of open data across a variety of disciplines and fields, and showcase some examples of how open data has helped. Erin mentioned earlier how open science and open data was so useful as part of the COVID-19 pandemic and helping to accelerate learnings. And that's true across so many other fields and cases as well. Craig and I will be the ones kind of on the backside of this section, and we look forward to engaging with you and hope you enjoy the content as well. And with that, I will pass it on to Rie to discuss open education.
Yeah. So I'm going to provide a quick overview on the open education unit. And so I'm moving on to the next slide. Okay. So we have three units, so Creative Commons, Open Education Resources, and Open Pedagogy, facilitated by me, Lucas, and Will. So I'm going to give a brief overview for the Creative Commons license here. So open education is often grounded in the application of Creative Commons license to teaching and learning materials. So Creative Commons license are open copyright license that give permissions for others to reuse the work under specific conditions. We'll start off the module with in-depth exploration of Creative Commons license and how they relate to copyright. In this module, we will explain the difference between using a work under fair dealing rules and using one with a Creative Commons license, and as well as give examples of what one can and cannot do with resources that have different CC license, and point to ways to find CC licensed content of various types. And then lastly, apply a CC license to their own work and share that work in a format that is easily reusable by others. And in addition, this year we have expanded the section on the ethical considerations of using Creative Commons licensed work, especially as this has become a major topic with the rise of the AI. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so and after we explore of how Creative Commons license work, in the next module we jump into open education resources, which is abbreviated as OER. So OER are teaching and learning resources, including full courses, course materials, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, software, and any other tools, materials, or techniques that are free of cost and access barriers, and which also carry legal permission for open use. Generally, this permission is granted by the use of an open license, for example, the CC license, the Creative Commons license, which allows anyone to freely use, adapt, and share the resource anytime and anywhere. So in this unit, we'll give examples of why learners and instructors value and use open educational resources, discuss strategies for adapting and contextualizing learning materials, identify and evaluate source of open educational resources, as well as develop and share an open educational resources. And going to the next slide again. So in the final module on open education, we will work on open pedagogy, which is about applying the open philosophy to the process of teaching and learning. And that means shifting the focus from what you teach with and to how you teach. So open pedagogy can involve a blend of strategies, technologies, and networked communities to empower students to have control and agency over their own learning. So in this unit, you will learn how to incorporate principles of openness and learner participation into the process of teaching and learning. And some of the topics that this unit will address are different definitions of open pedagogy, the different pedagogical benefits and impacts to integrate open approaches into teaching and learning, examples of different open assignments to transform learning so that individual student work can have impact and value beyond supporting the learning of the individual students, right and control that students have over their work, considerations around what we are asking students to faculty to do when we ask them to work in the open, and lastly, best practice when students work in the open. And then I'll pass it on to Lucas for the Gen AI considerations.
Wonderful. And, we struggled. There's a real opportunity and a challenge with generative AI right now, I think, in thinking about open practice. I think arguably generative AI has created almost an inflection point with open education overall. So we've tried to interleave generative AI throughout all of the different units, as well as within the challenge bank of the course. And we're also going to be doing a specific workshop around generative AI and open educational resources. But just to give you an overview now, so generative AI refers to tools that are capable of producing text, images, and other content from large data sets. One major use case for generative AI is using Gen AI to create learning objectives, summaries, quizzes, or even entire textbook chapters. So we now have the potential to quickly create these tools. So Gen AI presents real opportunities for the open movement, helping to create and adapt OER, summarize research, accelerate open access by creating content. But there are challenges. Most Gen AI tools are closed sourced and trained on opaque data sets. Outputs may include unlicensed content and bias and lack language diversity. So while generative AI can expand openness, it can also reinforce current barriers. In addition, we can think about bias, copyright, and accuracy. which are central issues to generative AI, as well as inaccuracy of content and misleading outputs. So I think it's a real challenge and opportunity to think about where generative AI plays in the open unit and how it's going to change open scholarship overall.
Okay, we're into the home stretch now. I'm going to recap some of the information that Will already provided in the course overview. First, key dates. We have units releasing on the 1st of each month. So the open access unit is going on right now for this month, open research next month, and open education following that. We do have the open chats and workshops each month, one of each. As Will said, please register for those. That helps us keep track of numbers and monitor progress through the course. The workshops are required. The chats are optional, but highly encouraged. We have our wrap-up session for the course on July 30th. For communication, we'll be sending out program updates twice monthly. They'll be in the updates tab on the course page. We'll also send those by email. If you have questions, concerns, you get stuck, you're not sure what's going on, you can reach us at open.ubc@ubc.ca. That email address is also at the bottom of all of the POS pages. And Trish just put it in the chat as well. Thank you, Trish. So with that, we will take your questions. Thank you.